David worked with the chambers of Godfrey and Carrie Queen's Council and Jonathan Kaplan Queen's Council at 5 paper buildings, now the chambers of Miranda, Moore, Casey, and Julian Christopher King's Council in the United Kingdom, where he handled criminal litigations. David remains a door tenant associate member of these chambers. David then returned to Uganda in 1998 and worked with Mugerwa and Masembe advocates up to September 2003, when he set out to found AF MPANGA Advocates. David has cultivated a specialization in handling and advising on complex disputes, corporate governance, regulatory compliance, and investigations. David also advises on strategic aspects of commercial transactions. He has a law degree from the University of Exeter and a barrister of the Honorary Society of the Middle Temple. Please join me in welcoming David to the podium.
Thank you very much, General. Senior officers here present, all protocol observed, good afternoon. We have the pleasure of having a panel on food security immediately after lunch. I'm told the biggest risk of food security to national security is to national security symposia, where the matter of food is discussed immediately after eating lunch, because keeping awake is a bit difficult. But we're going to try and keep it as light and as happy as we can. We have a distinguished panel this afternoon. Permit me to introduce the Honorable Eric Rwigamba. Please, as I introduce or call out your name, Honorable Panelist, you step up and take your seat. Honorable Eric Rwigamba is the Minister of State for Agriculture and Animal Resources in the Ministry of Agriculture and Animal Resources here in the Republic of Rwanda. Prior to his appointment, he served as the Minister of Public Investments and Privatization, and he also served as the Director General of the Financial Sector Development Directorate in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning of Rwanda. The Honorable Minister holds a master's degree from Oklahoma Christian University in the USA. He also has an MBA in Business Administration and Finance and a Bachelor of Commerce and Finance from Makerere University in Uganda. He has served on several boards like the Development Bank of Rwanda, Rwanda's Capital Markets Authority, Africa Export-Import Bank, East Africa Development Bank, and Access to Finance Rwanda. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Minister to the panel. We also have the privilege of having the Honorable Dr. Géraldine Mukeshimana. The Honorable Dr. Géraldine Mukeshimana is the Vice President for International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD. She has extensive knowledge and networks in agricultural and rural development, including with other multilateral development banks and climate funds. With her strong technical experience, she contributes to IFAD's strategic direction and operational performance. She has direct oversight of IFAD's budget, quality assurance, change management, and innovation. And prior to her appointment, she served as the Minister of Agriculture and Animal Resources for the Republic of Rwanda for almost a decade. During this time, the agricultural sector continued to grow and benefit from remarkable transformation. Amongst her accomplishments, she was able to attract private sector interest in agribusiness and pioneered the use of climate funds for agriculture. She has held various positions, including a postdoctoral molecular biology scientist, biology scientist for the International Livestock Research Institute. She's a postdoctoral scientist in genomics at the Michigan State University, and she was a lecturer at the Faculty of Agriculture and at the National University of Rwanda. She was also the National Project Coordinator for the World Bank's Rural Sector Support Program in Rwanda. She has a Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Engineering from the National University of Rwanda, Master's degree and PhD in Plant Breeding and Genetics, Crop and Soil Sciences, from Michigan State University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mukeshimana to the panel. Next, we have Professor Hamadi Boga. Professor Hamadi Boga is the Vice President for Programs and Delivery for the AGRA. His professional experience includes serving as the Principal Secretary at the State Department for Crop Development and Agriculture Research, and as Vice Chancellor of Taita Taveta University in Kenya. He also held various administrative positions in the Jomo Kenyatta University, Agriculture and Technology faculty, and has led to a broad experience, in building institutions and relationships with key government officials and agencies, development partners, donor agencies, local and international academic institutions, scientific research organizations, external stakeholders, etc. He has vast experience in fundraising, designing and directing public campaigns to affect public policy in line with agriculture, and has ensured growth and value added to the community. He's an effective communicator and negotiator and has successfully advocated for policy with high-level government executives, donors, and business leaders. He's very passionate about agriculture as a social economic transformation and sustainable vehicle and spearheaded development and implementations in the 10-year Kenyan agriculture sector transformation and growth strategy. He has played key roles in vital university and national agriculture improvement projects, demonstrated success in maintaining strong partner relations, and his top skills include teaching, agriculture policy, research, microbial ecology, and administration. Welcome, Professor Boga. Then we have Dr. Richard Ferguson. Dr. Richard Ferguson is the former Chancellor of the Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture, the RICA. Dr. Ferguson is a professor of soil science in the Department of Agronomy and Horticulture, the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. He has been a faculty member in the department since 1985, focused on research and extension, on improvement, nutrient use, efficiency of irrigated cropping systems, and minimizing loss of nitrogen to the environment. Dr. Ferguson, it says here, was born in 1992, It says beginning in 1982, has led research and extension efforts in Nebraska on precision and digital agriculture. And from 2012 through 2018, he served as associate head and interim head of the Department of Agronomy and Horticulture. And from late 2018 through to 2024, he served as the Vice Chancellor of the Rwanda Institute of Conservation Agriculture, as we said. He's authored and co-authored over 200 scientific and technical publications, and is a fellow of the American Society of Agronomy, Soil Science Society of America, and the Doherty Water for Food Institute. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ferguson and the panel as a whole. This very eminent panel is going to give us an overview of food security under the theme Food Security in Africa, Threats, Implications, and Options. We will use the widely accepted term for food security, which is the World Food Summit 1996 definition. From that, you'll tell immediately that I'm a lawyer. We like to start with definitions. Food security exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient food and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. I'll repeat it. Food security exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. This definition brings in a number of dimensions implicit right in there, which we shall hear from our panelists at different times. But broadly, there are food availability. Food security implies that food must be available. It must be available in sufficient quantities, and it must be of appropriate quality. and it must be the food of choice. There is very little point in saying people in the northern province of Musanze in Rwanda have a lot of food because there's a lot of caviar available. The food must be the food of their choice, and food availability also implies reliability of supply. The second dimension is food access. The food must not only be available, but it must also be accessible. So again, if we imagined that the food basket was here at the KCC, there'd be very little point in saying we have food security if the people are outside the fence and the place is guarded or cordoned off and they can't access the food. It sounds obvious, but these definitions sometimes have to be as basic as that. It must also be capable of being utilized. The available and accessible food must be utilized for the purposes of nutritional well-being. And this also brings in other inputs like access to clean water, good sanitation, you need the water to cook the food, etc. And lastly, stability. It mustn't only be seasonally available, accessible, and utilizable. It must be so in a stable, predictable way. It must be available and accessible to be utilized for nutritional well-being at all times. So, in order for us to try and bring out these points and how they affect national security, we need to ask ourselves and talk about, and the panelists will bring out these points in better detail than I would, that the military is tasked with upholding national security. Militaries across Africa and elsewhere are tasked with upholding national security, which has inherent in it food security. What should militaries know? What are the threats? What are the opportunities? What are the options and the implications? We'll be hearing about that. But then specifically looking at the militaries, Napoleon Bonaparte said, "An army marches on its stomach." That quote is often misquoted and says an army marches on its belly. Actually, what marches on the belly is a snake. An army marches on its stomach. And that means a well-provisioned army. You need a well-provisioned army for it to be effective. You need food. So food security is also critical to operational effectiveness of any military. Thirdly, the complex and interconnected nature of the threats to food security and the military's role in a multi-sectoral, regional, and international effort to manage these threats, to assess the implications, and to mitigate whatever threats there might be, as well as to think about the remedial options. We'll be hearing a lot more about that. And of course, it goes without saying that where there are threats to food security or where there is food insecurity, you get problems of conflict and instability. Sometimes the conflict and instability is the cause of the food insecurity. Sometimes the food insecurity is the cause of the conflict and instability. We shall hear more about that from the eminent panel. The population growth, the increased demand for food straining agricultural resources and infrastructure. How do we mitigate the threats to food security posed by population growth, and what's the role of militaries in these efforts? Regional and global economic shocks. So global food and other commodity price volatility, economic instability, and other factors that might affect affordability of food, availability of food, accessibility of food, the stability of food supply, all these things. The people that woke up to read about or hear about the war in the Ukraine, and then the next morning learned that most of the wheat that they were eating was coming from the Ukraine or Russia, even though they live in Africa. We're going to hear all about that. Climate change goes without saying. Desertification, erratic and inclement weather patterns, etc. All these things we've heard about in panels before. We'll be hearing from this panel as they impact food security. And lastly, poverty, the inability to afford food, as well as a lack of education, poor health, leading to poor use of agricultural resources, leading into food insecurity, and the other way around, food insecurity leading into malnutrition, leading to poor education, poor use of agricultural resources, etc. How do we deal with those issues? And the implications that we can discuss. I've already talked about social, political unrest, political instability, extremism and conflict. We heard about those yesterday and some of them today. We're going to hear about that specifically from a food security perspective. Population displacement and mass migration, public health emergencies, disease outbreaks that lead to mass malnutrition, etc. Economic stagnation and underdevelopment. All of these things are important for us to understand and address from a national security perspective and also from the experts' perspective. So without further ado, I'm going to invite each panelist to give us about 10 to 15 minutes max of their view on this matter. I will then ask them some questions. They'll come to the podium, make their brief presentation. They'll go back to their seat. I'll ask them a question or two arising out of their presentation. We'll go through each panelist in that order, and then we will open it up to the floor. So without further ado, let me have the privilege of inviting the Honorable Minister, Honorable Rugamba, to come and address the eagerly awaiting audience. Thank you very much.
Honorable Ministers, CDS heads of security organs from Rwanda and most importantly outside Rwanda who are visiting us, leaders in respective institutions, ladies and gentlemen, it is a very great pleasure for me for the first time to address men and women that are in uniform. I feel very excited to be here this afternoon with you to discuss, I think, one of the most important aspect of humankind, national security and food security. I think everything can come to an end if we don't have those two. People have said before, you cannot have national security without food security. And maybe you cannot have food security without national security. And I think where the two meet, that's where life is. Let me take this opportunity to welcome, especially those who are visiting us, to welcome them to Rwanda. I'm just adding my voice. To welcome them to Rwanda and to thank the organizers for having been able to bring us here together to discuss this important matter. I think David has been generous to touch on most of the issues we wanted to discuss about food security, what threatens food security, why it's important, what are the implications if we don't have food security, and maybe what are the options. I think the literature we have covers quite a lot on the first two portions of our theme. I will take much of my time to share our views in terms of what should be the options of addressing food insecurity or attaining food security. I think finding ourselves at this time here, I'm happy to note that we were able to have lunch. As I was having my meal, I reflected about many Africans who are seated under a mango tree or another shade. I reflected on many of our people who are in camps, refugee camps. I reflected on how many of our people who are actually seated even in trenches, try to hide from the sun. And so the issue of food security is a subject matter that is close to us, especially in the context of Africa. I think the recent reports indicate that only in Africa, 280 million people did not have proper meals. And so they are malnourished, they are not fed properly. If you break down that 280 to actually even at the continent level and you break it in different regions, I think the recent studies show that East Africa alone has about 32 million people. Central Africa, 33.2 million people. West Africa, 25.3 million people. And Southern Africa, about 12 million people. So 280 million people who are not able to be fed at the continent that everyone is praising, that we have a lot of resources. It is sad that especially for us leaders, and I also think that when there is a lot of food insecurity, we throw the burden to security organs to take care of the consequences of not being able to manage the problem. So at the continent level, that's the picture. If I wanted to reflect on quickly, in our case in Rwanda, a lot of efforts have been made, and we probably celebrate some of the humble progress that has been registered. But there's a lot of work to do. About 20% of our households are not food secure, are not able to get all the meal that we need. And I think to link a number of factors here, it could be interesting to see how that's serious before I talk about I think what threatens for me, we all now know. And I think David did a good job on that. But I think what we have seen in our case in Rwanda, and we continue seeing the same trend in Africa, at the continent, where you have food insecurity, you tend to have, probably let me start from poverty. So where you have poverty, you tend to have a bit of food insecurity. Where you have a problem of food insecurity, then you have a problem of malnutrition and the stunting of the children. Now, those are very serious issues. Where they meet, there's danger. Now, what threatens food security? Climate change. I will not spend a lot of time on that. Political stability and conflicts, we know. Poverty, access to market, storage facilities, infrastructure, all that. Now, the only issue I wanted to highlight here is the challenge where most of our countries and the continent, there are places where all those threats are sometimes found in one area. So the area is regularly hit by either floods or drought. The poverty levels are very high. People are not fed properly, so they are not healthy to work. And maybe it is worse if it is like in camps. So I think where we see a problem is where all those factors that threatens food security are in one place. That is, for me, what scares me. Because all the implications then of food security, they just also concentrate in the same area. And so the effect and the progress you want to make towards social and economic transformation becomes almost impossible. And so all other social and economic problems now emerge. So I just wanted to highlight a picture where most of those factors that threatens food security, at the same time where the implications of food security are in one place, you tend to have a disaster. As I said, I felt I would not spend a lot of time to explain what the dangers of not having infrastructure, of not having enough land, how that affects food security. I think that has been touched on very well. But I think I felt it could be important that I share with everyone here, what should be then the options? What should we be doing? We've had these narratives for long. We all know the dangers of conflicts and wars, and all these issues are with us. And the continent, without naming countries, especially speaking to an audience like this, you know what are security threats, how security threats are affecting every aspect of life. So when I was thinking about food security and probably bring it back home, what I think on the continent should be doing is, I think all efforts from the leadership, especially without leadership, let's not even have a discussion. If we are lucky at the continent and we're able to raise leaders at all levels that are able to develop an integrated approach that will be able to de-risk the entire agriculture sector, then we are bound to make some progress. So let me try to unpack what what I call the integrated approach. Oftentimes, we think about planning and resources that are not adequate. And I think when you're talking about a country like Rwanda that's even having a bit of small land, then maybe it is even more important. What I think should be our focus as we try to deal with the food security issues. Can we map out all arable areas where that land can be used to produce food? And I think you can leverage on technology to get all that land and put them in a database where you can map out that for me to create food for our population, we need to create food baskets. Map out the land. If you have mapped out the land, within the limited resources that we have, can we gradually start allocating infrastructure in those areas? Talk about some passable roads, some storage facilities, some warehouses, some cold rooms, something that can handle. Now that cannot take us 1 year, but we've had decades and decades of not making any progress in that direction. And I think what I feel for me, if we started a journey of mapping out food production or food baskets and start to make sure that all our limited resources are driven toward those areas, over a decade, then you have basic infrastructure. When you have mapped out the land for production, start mobilizing resources within and from outside to start working on irrigation facilities. Water is going to remain the most important factor to deal with climate change. Climate change is with us, but we manage the infrastructure in terms of irrigation. Now that we have a bit of irrigation, can we even go ahead and map out marshlands and areas that are likely to hold some water? Can we have a map where we know where those areas are and the sizes and the value chain that can grow there, and the soil and the soil profiling of the soil acidity and all other factors? Then you're creating a map that shows, for me to grow cereal, this is where I'm going to go. If I'm going to grow other items of food crops, I'm going to go this side. Can we then start mobilizing and create networks, groups, armies, basically teams that can be able to build the capacity in terms of agronomists, in terms of veterinarian officers that are going to help in the entire production cycle. I always joke, it's only in agriculture where someone loses a job, or someone is retired, or someone is bored, he decides to go and start plowing. All other activities, let it be a salon, you look for a right barber, a restaurant, you look for a chef, a hotel, you can go on. It's only in agriculture where someone gets frustrated and decides to resort to agriculture. Couldn't it be the right time in Africa to start deploying resources and skills and capabilities to agriculture? When you have the land, you get it with the basic infrastructure, with the basic capabilities to grow any value chain. And then you are able to produce. Then you are tending towards sufficient production of food. So we can't talk about production of food without having that right approach. After producing, can we now get the market? Can we look for the right market for our produce? If you followed me, I'm talking about having two programs, one that is social and one that is commercial, to try to create, to make agriculture as a business. If we have been able to do that, access to finance and insurance and credit guarantees and all other good things that people spend a lot of time on, they would have been addressed. So in my opinion, as a country, we need to say, where am I going to get my food for my population? And then you map out whatever. It can't be by mistake. It can't be by default. It must be intentional, that you try to concentrate all the resources where I hope to get your food. And with that, you are clear you are able to know, I have enough food or I don't have enough food. And then the cooperation begins in. If I don't have food, do I have the right infrastructure in a country? We have many friends from the region, from Kenya, from Zambia, from Zimbabwe. We all know how we handle post-harvest in some of those countries with a vehicle that does regulate supply and demand of the food. And for me, I still believe that with that, then you are able to have enough for your population. When you have food security, and then you should be able to have national security. If you don't have either of the two, then you're in trouble. So I just wanted to share with you that with all that, for me, I don't agree with people who think there's no finance for agriculture sector. There is enough food money to invest in agriculture sector, but we don't have a pipeline of good farmers to invest into, an environment where the risk can be calculated. I think I'll be able to get so many questions on that because many people will not agree with me, but I think for now I just want to pause here, David, and maybe I'll pick it from there. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. I think it deserves a big round of applause. You could take your seat, Honorable. Next, we shall have Dr. Mukeshimana, who will talk broadly on the subject, but it was very useful that the Honorable Minister ended on the question of finance. So from IFAD, I'm sure we'll be able to know also about the financing of agriculture. Dr. Mukeshimana.
Good afternoon, honorable participants, CDS generals. Thank you for this opportunity. I think my job is going to be easy because the moderator and the minister have elaborated on what I was going to say, but probably I wanted to start, since this is a session looking at the security and food security on African continent, and where I come from, I work for International Fund for Agricultural Development, and what we do is to co-invest with the governments to improve the quality of lives of the rural people. The reason behind that, I think for now, we know that the poorest people, they are still living in the rural areas. And when we look at the data, I mean, we hear global leaders saying that we are falling off the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. We are not likely to get there. And the reason we are likely not to get there, it's the fact that the world is getting more and more into the fragile context that are generated by the threats that have been mentioned, being insecurity, being climate change, being all of these conflicts. And I wanted to start with this map that is highlighting, it's an internal map within IFAD. So we monitor the areas where we are working so that we can be able to adjust and learn new ways of working in those conflicts, given that we co-invest with our governments, and we see that most of the governments are not being able to cope, so we keep adjusting and learning. But the most important thing is that as we see the whole Africa map turning into the red, then the question becomes, are we really going to be on the map by the SDG time? Because we see it, I mean, when it started long ago with Al-Shabaab, and then we get the Arab Springs and the Libya issues cascading down in Sahel and West Africa. And then we find ourselves that all the areas that we are working in are getting into the fragile context. And that is, to be frank, eating a lot of money that was supposed to be getting those people that we work for out of poverty. That's probably something that I wanted to start with, is threats that we see coming. And as the time goes, we hear numbers like the ones that the moderator has been saying, food insecurity, food security, and recently the African Union is coming up with a new definition saying Africa food sovereignty. I mean, there is a huge import bill that we see around. Currently, probably 50 billion per year goes to importing food that comes in Africa. That's a second threat that we see. And that importation, I mean, I previously worked here, but the big question that comes, and it's associated with what the minister has been saying, we see numbers on import bills, we see the potential numbers, but sometimes you ask yourself, have we analyzed and see what is the import beer that is necessary. As I travel in different parts of the world, the question becomes, are we as Africans probably trying to adjust our taste to what we to what is happening as the time goes? Because you see that probably we have a 50 billion import beer, but you will not be surprised to find that probably 40 billion import beers goes to the things that probably we should be having ourselves. That's another thing that is eating the money that should be going into economies of Africa and producing food, contributing to the food sovereignty and also to the security in general. That is something else that we see happening. I see that sometimes other parts of the world are adjusting into that, and it yields some results. The other thing that I wanted to show from our internal data is the correlation of the investment and food production with the security. I see the general from Mali, but I wanted to highlight that within our own data, we have observed 8% reduction in conflict in Mali in areas where we have been working with the government of Mali. That tells us that if you get the right investments, you are capable to reduce the conflict. Another data that we have observed on the continent is a 1% increase in land productivity that is associated with 3% reduction of conflict in Ethiopia. So all of these things are telling us where should we putting our money. Usually we say we should be putting our money where our mouths are, but again, it's not only for the mouth, but it's also for the national security, and those are being observed consistently, and probably that should be guiding how we get into the solutions. Probably, again, elaborating on the data that the previous speakers have said, we hear 3/4 of the land, arable land is in Africa. We hear 75% of the African population are young, therefore they are capable to work, they are capable to grow the economies. But what we don't see is translating these opportunities that we say we have into the transformation and economic growth. And one of the threats that might be laying ahead is falling into that potential trap and not being able to get out of the potential trap. And that is one, it's less threat as, you never say that threats. We all the time say conflicts and climate change, but we never say how much we are falling into the potential praise trap. And the big question becomes, how are we getting out of that potential trap and generate economies and generate sovereignty? And that is a big question that we don't see really coming as quickly as it is wished, because we have get to the point that we realize that we are not owners of our food systems, we are not owners of our water, as the Honorable Minister has mentioned. We don't even own our climate. Therefore, what is the resources that are available? How are we getting out of the comfort chair where we sit on the potential? That is a big problem that we see. Recently, it was late last year, given the say that the world is not achieving SDGs, the Secretary General of the UN commissioned a study. And then the study was to tell him what are the turnarounds that are needed so that we can break through and achieve SDGs. So what was obvious the turnaround of food became like on the top. And we don't see that again. I don't know if that a study went out and it's visible, but the turnaround of food, the turnaround of poverty, but again, if you go into the rural areas where we work, the poverty is associated with the food production and capacity. And for now, if you want to alleviate the poverty in the rural areas, you better work on agriculture. And then there was also a need of turnaround of energy and infrastructure, and those are to fix the issues that the Honorable Minister has been mentioning. So I want to say, I think going forward, what is needed? I want to build on my previous work and my experience. I see a role of capacity to adapt and do the right thing on the continent. Borrowing from my experience in Minagri, back in 2015, this country produces a lot of avocados. If you go to South, you will see a lot of huge, huge avocados. But the country wasn't exporting avocados. And then the question was all the time, but we see avocados, why aren't we making money out of avocados? But because the avocados that are huge and are very tasty, they are not meeting the market requirements that is out there. So they mentioned that I'm a prime breeder. One of the role of prime breeders is to breed crops, name them, and give the description of what are the standards the new crop that you have has to have. So it happened that a guy called Haas in California long ago made an avocado, and then the avocado is called Haas. And the European market took advantage of that. It has to have a certain length and a certain width to enter international market. And then you find that Rwanda is not exporting avocados. The reason it's not exporting avocados is that the avocados that are there, they are not meeting the Haas uniformity criteria. And then I think the organization I'm working with worked with the government of Rwanda. I'm excited to see that on the social media, Rwanda is exporting millions per week of avocado Haas. What that tells me is that incredible shift that can happen if we work with the population in a smart and quick way, knowing what we want. That also brings me on the question of how are we getting our population ready to what we want. And again, recently I attended a meeting. It was looking at agroecology and the soil health. And then I was sitting with someone and I said, but when I was growing up, there was a lot of soil fertility, fertilizers, soil health happening, and so many people went to school to study that. But it took the conversations on the food systems we did some that in Rwanda, and the African Union presented a position paper on Africa on what we need to do to turn around our food systems. And it happened that Europe identified agroecology as one of the lever or game changer because they have really worked hard, they used the right fertilizers, they had enough crop fertility. Now that we have the sustainability lens into what we are doing, then the concept of agroecology is coming back. And all of us, we are following. And then you see that people really, it's the right thing and it's known. But the question becomes, how are we stable in terms of policies? Because you find that there is a policy coming, it's said, and then the wind comes and wipe it away, and then the new thing comes. So that question comes to ask, are we really having the human capacity to understand what is right, and if it's right, can we implement it and scale it up to get the results that we want? So that is something that we feel like can be one of, I mean, it's not one of the solutions, but I'm mentioning it because, again, IFAD works with the governments to build the capacities across being the formal capacity, but also informal capacity with the farmers. Coming to the question of finance, I think the minister has elaborated on that eloquently. But again, we work in the rural areas and we don't see the money getting there. The reason the money is not getting there is not, sometimes I feel like probably agriculture has been a way of life for so long, and then probably the decision makers are feeling like they have so many conflicting needs, and then the farmers can do it and survive anyway. But that way is not going to get out to the food sovereignty and the security that we want. So it's really important that we think what is the financing mechanisms that are happening so that access to finance, being to the group of farmers that the minister has been mentioning, being to the rural farmers that I work for, are getting the investments that they need so that they can give us the food that we need. Those are few things. I don't want to take a lot of time, but those are the questions that we see around. I mean, currently there is a lot of say about the climate financing, but if I tell you that only 0.8% of that climate financing is getting into the rural areas, that's a shocking reality that we see. So for now, if we want to create jobs, if we want to be food secure, if we want all of these things that we want to do, the lower hanging fruit is to address the agro-food system right, so that at least we say this problem of food, we have addressed it, and then let's go to the next. Richard will be speaking. He comes from a land-grant university in America. The first thing that Americans did in the 1700s was to allocate a grant of land to universities so that they can do the teaching, research, and the outreach to the populations. So from there, you make sure that you are having the food. They also invested in mechanical schools. I mean, their laws and economies and everything, they came from England, but the first thing they had to do was to make sure that they are getting their food right. So it's really important that we think of getting to the food sovereignty, what it means, and the security. Let's get the people to have food. Getting to the jobs that we need for our youth, get the food systems right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mukeshimana. Without further ado, I now invite Professor Boga. Professor Boga, coming from the AGRA, the Alliance for Green Revolution, will help us understand how we can get the youth also engaged in this process. We've heard a bit about mapping from the minister, mapping out the arable areas, making sure that the soil is also understood in order that we use the resource, the agricultural resource, for the right crops. We've also heard about the financing and food sovereignty. It's a very important aspect of food security. And I just heard a little bit there in Dr. Mukeshimana's presentation, which I'd like you to pick up, Dr. Boga, about teaching, research, and outreach for agriculture, but more importantly, getting the money to the rural areas, getting the youth involved. It's a majority youth population. How do we mobilize that youth to food security? Dr. Boga, Professor Boga.
Yeah, thank you very much. All protocols observed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a very important topic for all of us as Africans, but also for the world. And I would like to thank the organizers for inviting AGRA. Our president, Dr. Agnes Kalibata, could not be here because she's in Europe, also engaging in similar fora, and she sends her greetings. Yes, food security has been defined by the moderator as availability, access, and also the ability to afford it. And today, the world does not have a shortage of food. Actually, we produce enough food to feed everyone. It's just the distribution of the food and where it is located versus where it is needed that creates a problem. So hunger still remains a problem, especially in Africa. About 1 billion Africans, according to estimates from the World Bank, have no access to healthy food. They have food, but it also must be healthy. And so this is the challenge that has remained in the world for the African continent to be able to feed itself. And it has improved. It's not as bad as it was before. It really has improved in certain ways, but it could be much better. And we hope with the interventions that countries are deploying together with the partners, that it can only get better. And of course, we have had the risks that are out there, but I think we are still in a position to keep on improving on what is there right now. And some of the challenges have been highlighted. Pandemics like COVID escalate the problem further, and the ones who are affected most, again, are the people in the African continent. Conflicts like the Russia-Ukraine war escalate again the problem, and then it creates a crisis right here. In Africa, you also have locust epidemics that come and they create another food crisis. So we are always having one crisis after another coming. Right now, Kenya, it's raining. You saw the flood yesterday, the whole of the coast region. There are cyclones there, which it hit even Tanzania and the coast of Mombasa, and it's disrupting all these production. And so that means our production system have to be resilient. We have to understand this. We have to equip ourselves with the agro-weather information and equip the farmer with agro-weather information to be able to respond. To equip the farmer with pest information to be able to respond. And this conversation is not new. We are just advancing it. CADEP, which is the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program, was discussed by the AU, I think in 2013. I think it was in Maputo. And there were certain principles that were agreed that each country had to commit to. We had to commit to Africa ownership and leadership around this problem. We must own this problem. We must commit to accountability and transparency in the way we tackle this problem. We must commit to inclusiveness, making sure that youth and women and other vulnerable populations are not left behind when we are developing the agriculture sector. We must commit to evidence-based planning and decision-making. It cannot be ad hoc. The issues are too complex for people just to wake up and make decisions left, right, or center, which have implications on livelihoods and the welfare of society. And we must commit to regional cooperation. We must cooperate. We must learn from each other. We must find ways to share resources and work together towards tackling some of these problems. And the African Union again went back in 2015 after 10 years to take stock and asked countries again to recommit. This is what is called the Malabo Declaration. So we have to commit again to these principles because they are valid today as they were valid before. And out of the Malabo commitments, and this is where the action ought to really focus, countries committed to investing at least 10% of their public budget to agriculture sector. Majority of them are not on track on this. Most of them barely commit 1.5. So how is the agriculture going to grow if we are not putting in the necessary resources? And it's not just that. They were to commit also to invest 1% of that in research and development. And they are not investing in the research institutions in the way that they committed there. And they committed to reducing poverty by half by 2025. It's next year. And we are not going to hit that target. They committed to ending hunger by 2025. We are not there. We are still way, way behind. And they committed to boosting intra-Africa trade. All of these, as our head of states and political leaders made these commitments. And then, of course, supporting the production system in such a way that we are able to respond to climate issues. And then they committed to mutual accountability. Now, every 2 years, there is a review, the so-called biannual review. Only a few countries like Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Morocco have shown consistency, have shown effort. The rest of the continent is a big disappointment in certain ways because although there is a commitment, you don't sense like there is a lot of work going. And to turn ourselves around requires a lot of work beyond just signing paper and making declarations. So the framework of how to get ourselves out of the woods is there. We don't need to write another one. We have to find a way in which to really put these commitments into action. And so the challenges remain, but the pathways out of these challenges are very clear and they are known. And if we are going to implement these measures half-heartedly the way we have been, the climate crisis, we will not be able to cope with it. We will not be able to cope with it. So we really must have these conversations in such a way that we get out of the lethargy as far as implementation is concerned, especially considering that the geopolitical tension and the multilateralism that was there before seems to be fragmenting. And if it's fragmenting, it means probably resources, including development aid, is going to reduce. And so that means inequality is going to increase. So that means we have to rely on our own and on our political leadership to get us out of the woods. And so this is a very serious conversation that we must have with each other. I was a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Agriculture in Kenya for 4 years. And during that time, I had the pleasure also to work with Géraldine and the colleagues in Rwanda. During the time of COVID, the connection between security and food security was total because countries were going into lockdown and we had to design system to make sure that people in Kibera is the biggest slum in Nairobi, were going to get access to food because we knew if they were not going to get food, then all the measures about blocking the country were not going to work because probably they could tolerate it for a day or two, but after that they would think, would I wait here and die of COVID, of hunger, or do I go out there and fend for myself? So in Kenya, we created a food security war room, actually, to really track food. We've never tracked food like that. Before, we had been doing it casually. But those days, because of the implications as far as security was concerned, we were tracking it daily. We were insisting on those numbers, including trade, including production, including consumption, so that we were doing what we were calling the food balance sheet for the country every day, for every commodity that was critical, and making sure that the logistics were there and the factories remained open and food was able to move around. And I'm sure each country had similar kind of operations. So I think the statistics have been given. We are importing way too much food. And if we don't act, this bill will continue to increase, because the African continent is the only continent which is still growing. By 2050, there will be 2.8 billion Africans. We will be bigger than China. By 2030, we will have 300 million more Africans to feed. So the pace of growth of the agriculture sector must keep with the pace of the growth of the population. Otherwise, it will become very expensive and very difficult to feed this growing population. And part of the problem, from where I see it, I'm a scientist like Géraldine, is that our agriculture and our policy makers embrace science casually. So when you go to our research institutions, they look like neglected entities. They don't get funding. So our yield, for example, for maize, which is a major staple, is 1.5 metric tons per hectare. While in the US, they are doing 12 metric tons per hectare. So you can see the gap there is science, the gap is knowledge, the gap is education and extension. So our farmers have very low yields, and it's reflecting on the price of food. Also, it's reflecting on their own incomes. And so we have to fix that. We have to embrace science wholeheartedly and fund it and support it. And it's one of the tools that will help us get out of this problem. Embracing science also will help us cope better and adapt better to climate issues. There is no other country that will do our science for us. We have to do the science ourselves. So science is not a by the way. Science is like the main thing. When we talk about commitment to evidence decision-making, evidence-based decision-making, there is no way you're going to do that if you don't have strong scientific institutions. And I'm not just talking about biosciences and agriculture. I'm talking about all sciences, sciences, including social and economic and other forms of sciences. So at AGRA, which is an African institution created to support African government to modernize their food systems and make sure that we are able to move. So we engage with most of these governments at the political level and at the technical level to make sure that there is political buy-in as well as technical buy-in. When the politics is aligned and has clarity about strategy, it becomes very easy because the technical part will just align so long as it gets the necessary support. And AGRA has helped, including this country of Rwanda, to build systems. And the other 12 AGRA countries where we work, we help them to build systems. Agriculture requires seed systems. Most African countries did not have seed systems. We have helped to build systems. both the regulatory side as well as the scientific side of seed systems. So Rwanda right now is self-sufficient on some of the major seeds, like maize, to the point that they are willing to export. They're able to export. But it requires cooperation, especially of political leadership. And we really appreciate the fact that in Rwanda, the support has been very good. AGRA also focuses on sustainable farming systems because of the issues of climate change that we have talked about. And so we are working with governments also to bring about sustainable farming systems so that it's not business as usual in the way we farm, but it's informed by systems that are going to be good for the planet, but also good for the farmer and for the economy. We are now also looking at inclusive markets, trade, and finance, working with them to make sure that the ecosystem for markets and trade are working. To the point right now we have what we call a regional food balance sheet. Right now there's a crisis out there in Southern Africa, and Zambia is going to produce like a third of what they usually produce. If you don't have a regional food balance sheet that shows where the food is, how are you going to move food around? And again, political leaders have the responsibility to move us from looking at ourselves as competitors to really looking at ourselves as allies, so that trade is facilitated. I think in this century, there is no room for closing borders and such kind of things. I think if there is data, there is information, there is sharing, goods will flow. Kenya on its own cannot survive. They don't produce enough maize. They always have a deficiency of about 10 million bags. The moment Tanzania closes the border, the price of unga will go up, people will be in the street. So it's a shared responsibility. We must have these conversations. One time in 2020, I found myself and a colleague from Rwanda in the State House in Dar es Salaam talking to President Magufuli to allow food to move when I was PS. And I talked in Swahili to him and told him, udugu ni kufaana, udugu si kufanana. Because we must, we must synergize and work together to make sure that our countries are secure and especially food secure. So let me summarize what I feel. No, there's one pillar of AGRA that is very critical: policy and state capability. Without a mature, capable state that is doing things intentionally and deploying policies that will enable the agriculture sector to grow, it won't work. So we spend a lot of time helping governments to do policies and to build the capabilities to implement, including embedding advisors where they are required to make sure that things are not just lying around and policies are not gathering tasks. So for me, I feel if we really have to get the agriculture sector going, we must, as a priority, invest in research and development, education, training, and extension. If we don't do that, we cannot talk about food security, and we cannot talk about ending poverty. I think this is a conversation that has been there and will be there, but it's now time to really make those investments. We must put the money there, both the government, but the government must also enable the private sector to put the money into agriculture. It will repay itself because this is an investment. It's not like we are throwing away. If we invest $1 in agriculture, it will multiply itself, including creating those jobs for youth and everyone else on top of the issues of food security. We must improve the regulatory environment, including this regional cooperation, to facilitate trade. Humanity has always traded, and this is not the century where we start throwing boundaries again. And I know WTO is in trouble, and the issue of trading blocks is also in trouble. but at the global level also, things need to stabilize and know that humanity will survive the climate crisis together, or they will perish together. And countries must also invest in data and digitization and mechanization so that we have information. How are you going to make decisions if the information is not there? And then, most important, we must invest in water infrastructure, water storage, and farming systems that conserve water, because that is going to be a very, very essential commodity. To conclude, I would like to quote an author called Stephen Dacon. He wrote a book called Gambling on Development, Why Some Countries Win and Others Lose. He says, and I quote, "Successful growth and development requires the presence of a development bargain in a country. That is an underlying commitment to growth and development by members of a country elite." So the elite must commit to development. Political elite, business elite, they must commit to development because they are the ones who make the decisions that matter. And if they keep making the wrong decisions and they do not commit to implementation, nothing will happen. So durable political and economic deals among elite, because all of it is about deals actually. Starting with peace and stability, the elite must commit to peace and stability, because where there's conflict, there will be no food security. A mature, sensible state must know what our government can do and what the private sector can do, and set the boundaries clearly and make sure that they create a facilitative environment. And because it's a gamble, you can come up with a policy and try it and it doesn't work. You must be able to learn and correct course. All countries have gone through similar experiences. So I think it's upon the political elite and the business elite of every African countries and the African government to get us out of the woods. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Boga, for that very elucidating presentation. I picked up a very important point, and I observed from the panel, he's talked about the need to rely on science. We need to understand and leverage science. This panel doesn't have a pastor, it doesn't have a witch doctor. So prayer, it sounds to me, is not enough. We have to be led by science, which is a good way of bringing in Dr. Richard Ferguson to talk to us about the science of food security. Dr. Ferguson, the floor is yours.
Honorable ministers, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to be invited to participate in this symposium. Thank you very much for the opportunity to return home. The last 4 months or so, I have been away from what had been my home, Rwanda, for over 5 years. I had the privilege of serving as the first Vice Chancellor of the Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture, which is a joint effort of the government of Rwanda and the Howard G. Buffett Foundation in the United States. The mission statement of the institution of RICA is to educate and inspire the next generation of innovators in agriculture. And I would say that's a place to start in thinking about food security, is to inspire the next generation. One challenge that we face is that many youth, many in general, perceive agriculture as a profession to be avoided, of one of hard work with little income, little recognition from society. That's not unique to Rwanda. That's the same perception in the United States, where I have come from, is that youth generally perceive agriculture as a career that they do not aspire to. And so one mission of RICA is to help change that, to help youth recognize that they can have a bright, productive, lucrative career in agriculture. Because to be financially sustainable, to be secure, requires the best and brightest minds. And we need to attract those minds into agriculture to help them to see the future that they can have, the future they can help their country have through agriculture. I'd like to start with a list here of brands of agriculture. I will call them brands. Names of agriculture that you will see associated with directions that one should take. And so I've listed here starting with conventional agriculture, conservation agriculture, organic, regenerative, climate smart, precision, digital, and so forth. And I would say at the onset that there are positive aspects about all of these brands of agriculture. Conventional agriculture is often presented as something that we need to move away from. It's the source of problems that we may have in agriculture, and we need to move to one of these other brands. And yet conventional agriculture is in place because farmers are doing what they know to be productive. It's there because it's, to their knowledge, been the best way to grow crops, to grow livestock. And often there are aspects of conventional agriculture that are very appropriate. So we should not denigrate conventional agriculture as something that's always bad and all of these others as better. But there are certainly attributes of all of these types of agriculture that we want to embrace, understand, but as has been mentioned, to apply science to each of these concepts. And it takes science, research to be able to understand how each of these components or brands of agriculture may have aspects that are good to use. Other components may or may not work in this climate, in this area of the country or area of the globe. We need to be able to discern how to pick and choose which practices are appropriate for a given farmer, for a given region, for a given country, and adopt and encourage those. As a side, I've listed the web link here for the Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture, our list of principles that we teach and practice at the Institute. A set of 9 practices related to crop and livestock production that we intend to optimize production, optimize profitability in ways that are environmentally sustainable. And our practices and approaches that we believe are good foundations for agriculture in Rwanda. The background photograph that I've had here is a photograph I took on the way to Musanze here a couple of years ago in March. One thing that has struck me about living in Rwanda is the beautiful scenery that we're surrounded with. And at the same time, how challenging it must be to farm here. The landscape that I'm used to coming from the central U.S., the Great Plains of the U.S., is extremely flat. And quite the opposite of what you see in this photograph. This photograph, as I mentioned, was taken in March, so it's at the start of the rainy season. And that's the challenge, at least on some of these fields that you see. Many of these fields are covered in vegetation, which is ideal. But some of these fields you see are bare. They're land that's being prepared for planting as the rainy season starts. And yet that exposes these fields, this landscape, to what I consider it to be the greatest threat to agriculture in Rwanda is degradation of soil quality, especially through erosion. So one heavy rain, while these soils are exposed and uncovered, unprotected, can remove many decades of soil, as soil has been produced through natural processes, and forever in that farmer's lifetime reducing the productivity of that land. Productivity that cannot be completely replaced by just adding inputs such as fertilizer, pesticides, or improved seed. So my challenge to Rwanda and to much of Africa is to focus on ways to improve our soil as the foundation for food security. No country can deny the soil as the basic resource for food that we eat, whether it be crops or livestock. The production that we take advantage of, that we enjoy, originates from the productivity of the soil. Along with that then has to come access to high quality seed, availability and affordability of the appropriate fertilizers, dealing with issues such as post-harvest loss. But it all comes back to considering the soil as the basic foundation for productivity and security of the food that we eat. So from my institution's perspective and mine as a soil scientist, the adoption of conservation practices that can help protect and enhance the quality of soil are foundational to what we need to consider. But then also access to emerging technologies, things that we see that are becoming widely adopted in North America and Europe, we do not see in Rwanda. I have on this slide some photographs of what is fairly typical production equipment in North America, where I now do research and teach. I'm not suggesting that these pieces of equipment would be appropriate to Rwanda. What I am suggesting is that the underlying technologies and principles that allow us in North America and Europe to adopt precision agricultural technologies should have a place in Rwanda and Africa. And much of that has to do with data. The access to the generation of high quality data, protection of that data, use of data to be able to make informed decisions so that you will increase the production and profitability of the farm that you operate. Now these pieces of equipment are appropriate to large landscapes, to non-hilly terrain, not at all appropriate to Rwanda, but they are part of what is being adopted in the United States and many European countries as part of the brand of agriculture called precision agriculture. So how does that translate to Rwanda? This farmer in Gashora, just north of the campus of the Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture, is a very typical smallholder farmer in Africa. She's preparing her land for planting here at the onset of the rainy season. Most of us would not consider her to be a precision farmer. And yet, I would say she is in many ways. What she is capable of doing is knowing her land. She farms a small enough land area by hand that she is intimately familiar with her farm. She knows the areas that are more productive, that are less productive, the areas that need special attention, the areas that she may want to harvest first. All of that type of management is what is enabled for large farmers through data and the machinery that I had in the previous photograph. What she does not have is information, the data and then the information to make well-informed decisions other than what she can observe with her eyes, what she knows from experience operating her farm. So what I would suggest for Rwanda as a foundation is to focus on soil quality, to adopt conservation practices such as no-tillage, crop rotations, use of appropriate economically driven inputs to protect soil from erosion, using these practices in ways that are profitable and environmentally sound. For example, this is a field at RICA, the Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture, which has been planted to soybeans without tillage. So you see the soybeans emerging through the maize residue from the previous crop. Maize residue has been there to protect the soil from erosion in between growing seasons. The planting practices that are available now to plant without tillage are available to farmers, whether they be mechanized or small-scale hand-operated farmers. And then finding ways to mitigate crop stress. And a lot of that comes down to data and then using that data to make informed decisions. A couple of things that I'll point out here. The middle photograph is just a depiction of the swarm of satellites that are in place over the Earth at any given time. Many of those satellites are now being used to collect information in North America and Europe to advise farmers on what they should be doing. A project that I'm involved with in Nebraska uses data collected daily by satellites to inform them during the growing season as to when they should apply nitrogen fertilizer. That allows them to apply fertilizer only when the crop needs it, at a time and in a way that it is environmentally and economically sustainable. That technology is available, or could be available, to Rwanda farmers. The satellites are overhead over Rwanda just as they are overhead in Nebraska. And yet there is very little, if any, use of that information. I'm not suggesting that a smallholder farmer is going to directly access that information, but advisors could, and they could provide advice to farmers in areas that allows them to better mitigate stress. And then the last photograph is students at the Institute on campus scouting the field during the growing season. This is a field of maize, observing crop growth, collecting soil samples, using GPS to collect the position of that information, and then using that information to come back and create maps about the properties of the crop throughout the growing season. These students are being trained to adopt these practices in an appropriate way for Rwanda agriculture. So I would pause or stop with this photograph. This is an image taken last December of a dairy pasture on the RICA campus. This image was collected with a drone, an unmanned aerial vehicle, using a multispectral camera that generates an image called a normalized difference vegetation index image. It's looking at the reflection of light and two different wavelengths from this crop, turning that into information that the farmer can interpret. So areas in this image that are greener have more crop growth, more production. Areas that are red or yellow have less or little crop growth. Now, for a dairy pasture, that may be of less interest than you maybe would have an interest in maize or some other crop. And yet, this can give us guidance on how to manage this field, and with high frequency, high temporal density in this data, one can make decisions throughout the growing season on how to optimize production for the field. So a challenge is how can we turn this information, which is commonly used in some parts of the world, into information that can be readily used here in Rwanda for smallholder farmer production. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ferguson. We're just about to commence our question and answer session. I think I'll ask a couple of questions to each panelist and then open it up to the floor. I promise to look out for the front and for the darker-skinned participants who might have questions. Let me start with you, Dr. Ferguson. Very interesting last image taken with a drone. What we've heard a lot of in the previous panels has been the need for cooperation between the military and other sectors. to deal with climate change, to deal with the energy crisis, etc. The image that you used here around, taken from a field, taken with a drone, is this something that, a technology that could easily be shared so that, say, military drones could then also be used to give information for precision agriculture? Dr. Ferguson.
Excellent question, and the answer is yes. The use of a drone to collect that information partly is done at RICA to teach students about the technology. It allows them to see the sensors and the platform from which it's collected, and then to readily receive the data that the drone has collected and convert that into the image, which then is information that can be used for management. There's nothing really critical or magical about the drone. It's just a sensing platform. You could collect the same information by hand from the ground, or from a vehicle above ground, or from an aircraft, or from a satellite. Drones have gone through a transition phase in the US where initially they were used to scout fields for stress, like I've illustrated here. And practitioners have recognized that the land area that needs to be covered and the area that needs to be covered in an appropriate amount of time is challenging with a drone. So it's common now to see users of this technology moving to satellites instead of drones. But the underlying technology is the same. It's the idea of collecting information that relates to crop stress during the growing season and then responding to that stress to the season to correct the situation.
Super, thank you very much. Professor Boga, you talked about the lack of commitment to the agricultural sector as one of the impediments to fighting food insecurity. Yesterday, one of the questioners, I believe it is Dr. Vladimir, who insisted that he's not related to Putin, but he then talked about fear. There must be something about Vladimir's and fear that goes together. But he was talking about climate change, perhaps the panel not having instilled sufficient fear in the audience. Could the lack of commitment to the agricultural spending also be linked to a lack of fear, in inverted commas, around food insecurity? Do the people who talk about the need to commit more money not bring about the kind of fear in the policymakers' minds that is necessary for them to commit with money? And could the military bring that fear if the military were to say, invest that money or else? What do you think, Professor?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I used to be PS and I used to struggle to persuade colleagues that for us to really be able to grow enough food to feed the country, we need to invest in agriculture, and not just fertilizer, which is what most politicians like, but public goods in agriculture. And that means knowledge and extension and infrastructure to facilitate the agriculture sector so that the private sector can go in. So I think part of the problem is just the fact that there are other competing needs, like the education sector, which usually takes the biggest budget, and the health sector and other infrastructure, which then it means the agriculture sector always gets the raw end of the stick. And that means this problem will persist unless we figure out how to apportion resources properly to drive the agriculture sector, and especially because most of our people rely on agriculture. So I think it's the deal making around the different sectors. And unfortunately, in most countries, it looks like the agriculture sector gets shortchanged when the deal making is happening.
And then, Honorable Minister, Dr. Mukeshimana introduced a very useful aspect. It's implied in food security, food sovereignty. And the sovereignty, of course, is always a matter that governments have at the forefront. How do governments, not only here but across the region, respond to the balance that has to be had between, for example, what Dr. Ferguson was saying, improving soil health requires fertilizer, which you might have to import. Food security also requires improved seed, which might be GMO and therefore controlled by multinationals. How do we get the right balance so that we're food secure, but we're also food sovereign? How are you coping with that, and how do you see colleagues across the region dealing with that issue?
I guess it's an ongoing discussion and debate, and probably it will take some time. But I think it starts from the recognition that this is something we must do, and to start working on it as a journey. If you think about all what you need to produce food, Africa as a continent, to be self-reliant, it's still quite a long way. And majorly, it's because of us, the governments, but sometimes it's because we are too late to wake up and start thinking about it. If you think about the Ukraine-Russia conflict, we thought it was far away from us until when you could not get the inputs we need to our farms. And so, until a time when African governments could wake up and start looking for the technologies that could produce the input we need, I think for me, that is something good to start discussing about getting our food sovereign, but it's going to take a long time. And the longer we take to start addressing it, the more, the longer it will take to be. The colleagues here and the generals, they know people differently. One of the tools sometimes they use is to actually deny food to a certain area. And then, so meaning that food itself can be used as a security tool to fight some bit of, and so I think what we have tried to do, if I draw a case of, for Rwanda, is to say, look, what do we need? So we need the land, so land we have. But also we need these inputs. So we have started working with the private sector to produce some of these inputs at home. Some of the seeds we need, we are able to produce them here and we're self-sufficient. Probably whatever could happen, we can produce our seeds and plant. For fertilizers, we have partnered with the private sector to set up a blending facility. We hope that that would address some of the challenges, but still part of the input we import in that plant, we import them. So you can imagine how long it will take. When it comes to some of the food items like rice, we don't see even the time when we're going to be self-reliant. So I think for me, I'm not concerned much about that in the sense of production, but creating an environment and mechanism where I can get food whenever I need it. I'll give an example. Countries like, and it works in fuel, it works in food and commodity business. I can buy food from Brazil when I'm here. And so provided I've done the right deal, I'll be able to get food without any limitation when I need it because it's my commodity. Yes. So if you ask me, what worries me more is not who produces this food for me. It's actually being able to create a network, a framework, where I would get food whenever I need it. And I think that's where cooperation and trading between continents and countries is very important. Yes. So in short, on one side, I believe that's the way to go. We need to be self-sufficient. because it can be a tool that can be used for any other bad thing against you.
Yes.
But I think it should not be the most worryful thing, because it's going to take us a lot of time to get there. And it's just a journey. But I just want to touch on to use of technology in agriculture that asked Richard. I think it's coming. You are saying, is it possible to be done in Africa and Rwanda? We are working on a project with the Rwanda Space Agency and the Ministry of Agriculture, and they have mapped out, apart from a few punches in eastern part of Rwanda, we have mapped out all plots of land that are above 5 hectares and above. We using technology and the drones and the GPS, and we have maps, and we have for all districts. And what that is going to do is to know that for this district, I have so much space of land. It's in my platform, and I can actually monitor whatever happens on that on that farm from my office. So yes, can it be done? Yes, I think it's something that as a country we are working on, and it's very practical. We have just few areas in the Eastern District, and then we know every section that is irrigated, every section that can be grown on any food crop. So yes, it's possible, and we are doing it.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Honorable. And lastly, Dr. Mukeshimana, before we open up, farm gate prices. Dr. Ferguson had a beautiful photograph of the farmer, the typical farmer, working her small holding with precision, as he rightly described it, but precision based on what she can perceive and what she knows, her personal experience, and that of her forebears. How do we get money invested in the agricultural sector to get right to that farmer, as we saw her in that picture? The farm gate price, how do we get generally an improvement in that person's life, who then also guarantees the security, the food security of the nation? Because many times the initiatives end up with, big headquarters, nice cars, R&D equipment which is in labs, and that person might not get the benefit of a lot of the budget that's spent. How do we ensure that money goes down to the bottom and helps also lift the tide? And I'd like to pick from Professor Boga's reference to the elite bargain. I think Dr. Stefan, his surname is Derkovitz. I've read the book recently. It's a very interesting book, and I recommend everybody reads it. His central premise is an elite bargain that leads to all ships. It should be geared to everybody being lifted. How do we ensure that the financial incentives and the financial investments lift all boats rather than doing it in isolated enclaves? Doctor.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, but I think sometimes it's important to, there's going to be always partnerships. There's going to be IFAD, government of Rwanda, working together to get the money to the farmer. But what is very critical is the in-house commitment. How do I make policies that are pro-people? How do I tune the mindset of my elite to feel like, okay, I am elite, but there is someone who needs my hand to get there for them to be also lifted up. I worked in development for a while, and probably we need to understand how the families get uplifted, because it's important to understand the countries are made of people, the countries are made of households and families. So the day we feel like the elite is somewhere and then the regular citizen is down there, it's all the time going to be very, very difficult to get the resources there. So one of the most important things is how the public resources are getting to the people, because There is an issue of quantity, but also of quality. I think in one of Dr. Boga mentioned the CADAP and Marabo declaration. There are certain commitments that governments have made on how to get the financing to the agricultural sector. So the question becomes, even if these policies are probably 20 years old, how much is it getting there? I think in development trajectory, it's important to make sure that we identify what is the short-term thing that I can invest my limited resources in, what is the medium term where I can invest, and how do I allocate accordingly, and what is critical. So the farmers, and there are farmers all around the world, but lessons are what happened before, because for now there is no, I mean, everything is known for now, but how do we learn what happened before, and how do we adjust together, and also shape up instruments and policies that can make the efficiency and the scale. I think it sounds hypothetical, but it's really important to have policies that are pro-people and make sure that the elephant in the room is implementation again, make things happen, because if it doesn't happen, I mean, you get trapped into the potential trap that I have been mentioning, and the farmers will be the farmers the way they have been.
Super, thank you very much, Doctor. We're opening up for questions now. I'd ask the ushers to help us identify and stand close to the people who have their hands up. It's sometimes difficult to see. We'd like to have a question up there. Lady, please start with your name. And,
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Emily Comfort Marachto. I'm from Uganda, and I'm an associate professor of media and development. I have 3 questions. This is a very interesting discussion, and one question goes to Dr. Géraldine. You said that money doesn't get to the rural areas. And my question is, where is this money? Why doesn't it get to the rural areas? And what can it be done about that? And then the Honorable Minister also said that there is actually money, and that's the irony, that there's actually money, but where is this money? And why is it not being put to good use? And I think it would be interesting to know that. And the last one is to Professor Boga. You made an interesting discussion, actually, and you mentioned that you would, what it would take, it might take the political and business elite to sort of have an interest in agriculture. My question is, what will it take to actually get them to do that? Because most of us who have tried farming in our rural areas, I mean, the thing is, I grew up in a rural area, and when I was growing up, it never occurred to me that we were poor. We always had a lot. There was always so much food. You could give food to neighbors, to whoever. And that's very different now. And those of us trying to farm in rural areas have a lot of difficulty doing that. But what will it actually take to get the commitment of policymakers, you know, the political and business elite to be able to do that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take 3 questions at a time. I see a question over here, and then one right at the back.
Yeah, thank you so much, moderator. Let me thank the panelists for the very brilliant presentations. Now, the previous...
Forgive me, sir, your name. I'm very sorry to ask your name.
My name, oh, sorry. I am Major General retired Dr. Richard Rutatina. I am a farmer after retirement. So the professor from Uganda, I think, asked the question that I wanted to ask the minister and Dr. Géraldine. Indeed, there is money and doesn't reach to us because now I'm a farmer. Where is it? Where does it go? At least I'm now representing farmers. If it is not reaching me, where does it go? So I'm happy here to represent farmers and ask. So the professor from Uganda asked that question. I'm emphasizing it. That's the question actually I wanted to ask both of you. It's already been asked. Now the question to, Dr. Géraldine, you talked of, among my farming, I'm a very big farmer of avocado, among other things. Now, I learned today that this house, because we are now told to, houses now, they call it green gold. It's the green gold. So we are now in it. But its failure rate is very high. I've learned today from you that it came from California. Now, bringing those plants from California, as I'm taking it to my farm in Muchuchu farm in Boga, I understand why the failure rate is very high. Now, could you help us in your research? Whether you modify them, there's genetic modifying or otherwise, so at least they can tolerate the climate in my Muchuchu farm. So otherwise, the failure rate is very high. Indeed, we are told that the standard requirement in Europe, where we exported them, they want us. A certain size, a certain quality. Our other traditional avocados are no longer accepted. But as we go into that area, the failure rate is extremely high. And I've learned why today from you that they are now from California. So taking them to my farm, it's really difficult. Could you help us among your farming lines? You research into how you can help us to relate the climate back there, here at home. To Dr. Ferguson, thank you so much for your research and the establishment of that university. You showed us definitely the types of farming, agriculture. Among them is that precision farming. Now, definitely this modern farming, the equipment are very expensive. So amongst your research in the university, can you help us do the research into appropriate technology, agricultural technology, which are at least affordable in this part of the world? Because I know the ability in back home in the US and Europe, the other farmer you were showing, the other lady was farming, her ability to acquire the precision equipment is definitely difficult. So can you help us in the university do research into appropriate agricultural equipment that can help even we, the poor farmers back here in Africa? I think that would be really good for us. Otherwise, talking about it, we know they are good, but affording it, like you talked of food security, you said one factor, it should be affordable. But also when we talk of modern equipment and modern farming, you can't achieve it when they are not affordable. So, and that I think goes to the Minister of Agriculture, to even Dr. Géraldine in their support. Let's see how this modern equipment can be affordable down to the farmer in the village. Otherwise, to be talking, and as long as they are not affordable, then it remains in talking only. So to you all, who have been telling us of genetically modified food, seeds. Long ago, we used to plant maize, sell some, then replant some seeds. This is how you can't do it. They tell us they are genetically modified. One question, are these genetically modified seeds safe for us? Don't they have long-term effect on our health? Two, can't we have seeds which we can resow like we used to do? Because I will harvest 50 tons, I sell everything, then I go to buy somewhere else, something else to plant, to sow. So we find that also not, it's not friendly, it's not a bit African. Can we go into research that can help us? If I've harvested my 50 tons, and again I go back to buy seeds to resow again. So I think that research, these modified seeds you are bringing also a problem. So thank you so much.
Thank you, General. We have one question at the back, then we'll go back to the panel, then we'll do the next three. I see the dark-skinned men are now even standing up.
Thank you. I am Superintendent of Police, Yako Emmanuel, from Rwanda National Police. I first of all thank the organizing team that have thought of this topic of food security. It is indeed a concern that always revolves in the back of my mind. My question still is reflecting on Rwandan perspective. It is a fact that you have made remarkable strides to make what it looks in terms of food security, considering the experience of Rwanda in 1998 to 2000. I recall, however, a big concern still, in my perspective, revolve on horticulture industry, measuring specifically on fruits and vegetables, considering the aspect of accessibility and even the quality of the actual product we access on the market. Not forgetting the aspect of fluctuation and the price turbulences. Honorable Minister, I think my question will be tabled to you. How do you rate our food security, especially in terms of horticulture, considering the fruits and vegetables? Does it have any concern? If it does, what strategies are in place to bring solutions to the same? Honorable Minister, not leaving it open, considering Rwanda's approach to any of the identified problem. It is an experience that when we identify a problem, we have always found solutions. Borrowing the recent experience of the model that we use to combat COVID, are you considering in any way to adopt some of the similar approaches to involve all the stakeholders, talk of the line institutions, the ministries, the finance institutions, the research centers, the local government, the security organs, to address the highlighted issues in terms of food security, most especially the one that I put emphasis on that has to do with the horticulture, particularly fruits and vegetables on our market. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's take those questions quickly. They were addressed, perhaps let me start with the Honorable Minister, just addressing that very quickly because unfortunately we're running out of time.
Right. I thought they would ask us some simple questions.
It's a very hard paper, sir.
But they asked a very hard one.
How do you rate food security, especially with regards to horticulture and fruit? And the other question to you was, where does the money go? And how do you get the political and business elites interested in agriculture? Honorable Minister.
Right, very good questions. I think, let me start with one of money.
Yes.
where the money, where does it go, how come it doesn't get to the people that needs it? I think the simple reason is that the value chains we're talking about are not yet treated as businesses. The value chains we're talking about, or more or less agriculture, it is just starting to be a business. And I think it will be easy to speak to the audience because some of our colleagues here are farmers, like Dr. Richard. I'll give probably quickly examples to understand it. It's not surprising that at one point in this country, we produced enough milk, and because of high supply, exceeding demand, we had to, were not able to sell it. And so, if you produce milk and you are not able to get a market, the person who lent money to you, or even if it is your brother who gave you equity, will not get the return. We won't be able to pay the loan. So meaning, in the milk production, the problem was you have production of milk, but you don't have a market. So the problem is not finance getting there. It's just saying your value chain of producing milk is not yet developed. It becomes our duty as all of us, the development partners, the government, and most importantly, the private sector, to work together, put in place an integrated value chain whereby from the production to the logistics up to the market. A good example we have is avocado. We have signed as a government contracts with potential with buyers willing to buy our avocado. We have even asked the cargo flight and through Rwanda to have asked our private sector producers, can you give us a schedule that every week you produce so much of avocado? Because where we have the market, they need reliable supply. We cannot get it. So the problem why avocado producers are not able to get the money, they need either loans or equity, is because the value chain of avocado from production, talk about the seeds, go to cold rooms and other logistics, up to the market sorting house, is not yet developed. Who is responsible? It's the government that is supposed to provide the infrastructure. It's the private sector supposed to be investing in this. So I can go on, but I think the problem is our farmers, are they getting access to finance? The answer is no. The reason is that our agriculture, especially in Africa, and especially smallholder farmers, have not developed, we have not worked together to develop the value chain that would make it an attractive business that is viable to be able to attract the finance we need. No wonder any other thing, including, I always joke, and I think I mean it. Someone who earns the salary of a small portion, maybe $200, gets a loan from any financial institution, and the farmer who has 10 hectares is not able to do it, to get that loan. And the reason is because we have failed as governments, as private sector, as development partners, to make sure that this value chain are businesses that would attract and give a good return. And probably, I will speak about still the issue of, let me speak about
getting people interested in agriculture. Political and business elite getting interested. The political and business elite getting interested in agriculture. Can you comment? There was a question on that. Perhaps you could address that.
The political link?
No, the political elite. How do you get the political elite, business elite to be interested in agriculture?
Make it a business.
Yes.
I was just say make it a business. Yeah. But let me explain it. And I'll pick example even over here in Rwanda. If you look at the number of apartments that are coming up in every corner of our city, vis-a-vis the level of investment that's going into agriculture tells a story that we have not de-risked agriculture and made it as a business to attract the same money that's going into the apartments. The few that have tried it with a proper support to make sure that it is properly developed, they will tell you, and I can say it without any fear, agriculture, any value chain you pick on, is more profitable than building an apartment. Right. The reason why that is not yet the case is because, and I will say all of us who have failed, we have not created the environment that allows agriculture to be a business. And simple, as long as we are still we are doing agriculture depending on rain, and when it doesn't come, then we count losses. Then finances will not move there. Investment will not go there. Politically, the elite you're talking about will not go there because the risks are still so high. There are some perceived risks, but they are actually real risks. And so, can I make a call, David, that all of us, governments, development partners who scatter money into soft areas, training, capacity building, can we concentrate all our resources from the government, development partners, and from private sector to develop the entire all the components of, let's say, avocado, from the production, the land, the seeds, the cold rooms, the sorting, up to the... So when a government, when you have Rwanda cargo flights, and they don't have avocado to take to Dubai, and the farmers are poor, I think we are all responsible for that failure.
Super. Dr. Ferguson, there was a question about affordability of precision farming equipment. Dr. Mukeshimana, there was a question about Hass avocado and GMO. Could we address those very quickly between the two of you?
Yes, on precision ag equipment, I would say initially maybe take the focus off the equipment and focus instead on the information. A smallholder farmer may not need equipment. She may be able to do things by hand if she only knew what to do, where, and when. So certainly a $500,000 piece of equipment is not practical for a farmer in Rwanda. Often is not in the US. And there's certainly equipment in between that would be appropriate. But first of all, think about how could we as a society through advisory services provide a farmer information about what to do, when, and where, and they may be able to do that without any special equipment, to be able to spray or apply whatever is needed at the right time.
Super. Dr. Mukeshimana, Hass avocado and GMO.
Okay, I don't think that probably the problem is Hass and versus no Hass. Probably the pioneer who knew that what they wanted, they zeroed on that specification. And then because they are the buyers, they ask everyone to go through that specification. And Africans loving to export raw material because there is no other alternative, we are obligated to fit into that specific niche market. But is that the only way to go? Because again, if we were doing the right investments, probably we wouldn't even need Hass avocados. Probably we should be processing the regular avocados and sell avocado oil, which has more value rather than exporting a cargo or container of raw avocado. So it becomes like chicken and egg issues. So first of all, we are not sitting on a negotiation table to make sure that our standards are the ones that are dictating the market. Second, we are not developing plan Bs that are helping us to get the maximum out of what we have so that we don't get to be squeezed by the demands, by the market requirements. But there is another plan B of one of the data that we like to quote at the African Union biannual review. The Africa intra-trade market selling among ourselves. Probably they are not asking for us avocados, but are we selling there? That's another question. So you find that there are millions of barriers that are stopping us to trade among ourselves, where we have a huge, huge untapped market. But because the identifier, number one, who knew what he wanted was to sell in Europe. It's really so costly to sell in Europe than probably selling in Côte d'Ivoire, for instance. But what is stopping us to sell in Côte d'Ivoire? It's our own issues. So to me, House Advocate is not a problem. Probably should be looking at other issues that are stopping us to tap into the market that is meeting our requirement. But we get stronger because that is the only market that we know, and probably that shouldn't be a case. That's number one on the question.
On GMO?
I'm not sure that I want to answer about the GMO question, but one of the things is that agriculture is a very intensive, investment-intensive business. So that's why I was like, okay, I see only 0.8% of money getting there. It doesn't mean probably the money in the landscape doesn't get there. What it means, it's not even sufficient. So to succeed in agricultural food system, there is a huge need of resources and money to transform. It remains what it is because there have been not sufficient investments that are getting into that, and that's what the minister has said. The relationship with that intense capital requirements, also the marketing. The minister is telling the milk. If the farmer is using, probably to produce 1 liter of milk, is investing 500 Rwandan money, and then sells that milk at 300 Rwandan money, then the question becomes, is the farmer making sufficient revenues so that he can be able to invest? So it's important that we identify that, okay, the productivity, the science, it's one side of the coin, but the failures of markets have been a big killers of agricultural development on this continent. And we really need to understand it and accept it, make sure that we are really structuring our markets correctly so that the farmers who are producing can get revenues to be able to invest. The day they get to be able to invest, the question of buying seed is not going to happen because anyway, okay, borrowing from my scientific background, the more the farmers save seed, the more the seed deteriorate because every single harvest comes with a whole bunch of diseases that are infecting the seed. So recycling the seed will be bringing along the diseases that are reducing your production. So to me, the question is not the seed. The question is the farmer getting sufficient capital to be able to buy the new inputs that he needs to produce more? So, the science is the science around the GMO, and it's a proof that a concept that has been proven. So, and there are so many things that are not right before we speak of GMO. So if we could do other things before going to GMO, the yield will be increasing tremendously. And then once we reach that plateau, then you can think of something else around the GMO or other technologies. But I wish we could do most of the basics to get there before we get to the debate of GMO, and I don't want to go into that.
Super. We've got 5 more minutes for questions. We had a question at the back, right at the back there. We have a question from the front here. Please make sure that you see. And we'll have one more question. Please keep the questions short. We only have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. My question is for Dr. Ferguson. Your presentation was very interesting, and you recommend a whole list of things that should happen to agriculture in Rwanda. Now, sitting here and knowing that you're from the US, my question was, given your experience in the United States and your observation of what the role of the government in agriculture may be over there, what would you recommend for the state in Rwanda to play as a role in the agricultural sector?
Thank you, Doctor. General Rugamba here. Rugamba, sorry.
Thank you, moderator. Really, mine is not a question, maybe a contribution. Once again, I'm Major General George Rugamba from the Republic of Uganda. I want to offer optimism. One disease which is deviling me is being too optimistic. And where do I derive this optimism? I derive my optimism from a book I've just come across titled Born to Win, From Bastardhood to Generalship. I'm yet to find out the author. Maybe by the time I leave Kigali, I'll have got him or her. The optimism I would like to offer is, I think we shouldn't worry. There is plenty of food on this, not only African continent, but on the whole globe. And it's not only plenty, but in excess. The problem is its uneven distribution, including its production. And we cannot leave this, we cannot point a finger to governments, but maybe even the private sector. Why do we fail to identify where there is less, and we feed such areas with food from where there is plenty and excess of it? I thought I would make my submission along those lines. I thank you.
Thank you very much, General. General, at the end of this session, I'll introduce you to the author of that book. He's in this room. We can have one last question in the middle there, gentleman in the middle. We have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm Major Emmanuel Traisire from Rwanda Defense Force, currently a student from Rwanda Defense Force Command and Staff College. So I have a question. I think I'll direct it to Honorable Minister. Depending on the figures that he highlighted in different regions having the issues of insufficient food, and actually matching with the reports from the United Nations Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Agency that indicated different figures, especially in the West and the East Africa regions, that depends or relies on the humanitarian aid. So my question is, as a strategist, which Africa do you see in the next 20, 30 years if this can continue to happen like this? If there is no proper measures to mitigate or prevent this. And this reminds us about the sessions that we had yesterday on underlying causes of youth radicalization and terrorism. Which Africa do we see in the next 20, 30 years, as I said, if this can continue? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I'll ask the Dr. Ferguson and the Minister to give answers, and maybe each one of you to give a quick summary. We've really hit 4 o'clock. One of our panelists has had to leave under armed escort. Let's answer the questions and give our last remarks.
Okay, thank you very much for the question on how can government policy support food security, I think is central to the question. Well, I've been privileged to be highly engaged with the Ministry of Agriculture here in Rwanda over the last 5 or 6 years, and have seen the development of the new plan, PSTA 5, as it's been being developed. And I think many of the policies and procedures that are in place, implemented by the ministry and the government in this country, have been very positive towards engaging farmers in practices that are going to help them be more productive, more profitable, more secure. I think much of that really needs to center around education and information to farmers, providing advice for them. Certainly there's been support for financial access to seed and fertilizer, which many farmers need help with yet. But I think the information and education on how to use those inputs and how to adopt practices that are going to help protect the soil are very central to what I think government should be encouraging, and I'm anxious to see that this government will be doing that as well. Just to summarize, I think it's certainly been an honor to be on this panel with these distinguished panelists. It's been very informative to me, and I thank you for being involved.
Thank you, Doctor. Professor Boga, let's just summarize and...
Thank you very much. Also to thank the team for inviting me. Number one, AGRA has funding for the avocado value chain that is going to work with the stakeholders for the next 3 years to resolve those what we call binding constraints that are hampering the sector. So we have our eye on the avocado value chain in Rwanda, and I'm sure working together we'll be able to resolve some of those issues. Next week, we'll have a trip to Kenya to look at the way the avocado value chain is organized and see how they have tackled it, because they have been quite successful. And then the most important thing is, if we are going to treat farming as a business, then the farmer needs business development services. So that means the extension, the way we know it, has to change, so that extension becomes a system where we bring innovation and entrepreneurship to farmers, so that they are able to look at the markets, grow for the markets, adopt new technologies, and advance. So that means the next generation of farmers should not do it the way our fathers and probably ourselves have done it. We must train farmers to be farmers, just like the rest of the world does. Here, it is just a cultural undertaking, and that is why it's very difficult. And we must also support farmers to organize themselves so that they can enter the market in an organized manner. They can negotiate for the market, they can negotiate for financing, and they can negotiate for everything. And finally, the political elite and business elite have to see rural development as a major part of the country development. Otherwise, we have all this rural-urban migration that we cannot stem because everybody is running away from rural areas. And it will take leadership of the like of President Kagame and others like him to chart this transformative path. Thank you.
Super, thank you very much. And finally, Honorable Minister, wrapping up essentially.
Right, thank you so much. I think I will react quickly to what the question that was asked by Major Emmanuel on the Africa we want to see 30 years down the road. I think for me, especially in terms of the way we are going to give opportunities to our youth, I see a situation where all Africans are waking up to start looking at valuing life and making sure that the citizens of any nation have got to have food and all other services. And I see a discussion is starting to say, instead of encouraging rural-urban migration, can we take the infrastructure, in our case, agricultural infrastructure, to these areas, rural areas, where we see the most valuable resource, which is land, and make sure that whatever is required in terms of infrastructure, irrigation, mechanization, increased technology, are all applied, extension services. And then I see a situation where instead of young people migrating to town, to urbans, they're going to see an opportunity that most of our people now are seeing, where you can make more money on the farm than coming to do some petty jobs. And I think it is easier to spell about, to give an example, to picture that. I have someone who left a job, a lady, and decided to go into poultry. Today she has about 40,000 birds. And she told me she regrets one thing. She took long to leave that job. And for her, if she had a chance to speak on a global radio station, she would tell people, can we make land that we have productive, such that our youth are able to make money? I like what the general said, such that the areas that are be able to produce, they're able to produce, and those that are not able to produce, the logistical network are able to access that food at the right time, at the right price, but also at a cost that covers the cost of production. With that, then I think, a better Africa, where we no longer have to dive into the oceans and seas, but actually stay. I see many Africans come back to the continent, to Ghana, to Uganda, to Rwanda, and say, I came back and I'm producing more than I was producing when I was in Europe and US. That's the Africa I see, where now there is people are attracted to where they come from. Thank you very much.
Super, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking the panel for that very enlightening presentation. I'd like to thank the Command and Staff College for affording us this opportunity. And let's go away to put these things into practice, because it's all about implementation. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Another round of applause for the excellent panel. Thank you very much. This marks the end of today's deliberations. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your stay.